Hello and welcome to New Wave History, and I'm with Dr. Ayesha Jalal, who needs no introduction, a professor at Tufts University, the foremost historian of South Asia and Pakistan. And I'm really privileged that we are meeting in Lahore at her home today. This is about Ayesha Jalal's new book, Muslim Enlightened Thought in South Asia, which documents the late 19th century and early 20th century Muslim thinkers, writers, poets, intellectuals, public intellectuals who shaped certain ideas liberal ideas of Roshan Khayali, of open-mindedness, engaging with knowledge systems, and even engaging with the colonial moment. And thank you so much, Dr. Jalal, for your time.
Thank you.
This was a fascinating read. I'm so glad that that you wrote this book, because we often think, Muslims have never had this moment of enlightenment. These are Western concepts. Look where Europe is. You know, the whole usual discourse that we have. So this book must have taken years to brew and come out. And tell us a bit about your own journey in terms of historiography and doing so much work on South Asia, and how did this idea germinate and turn into this book?
Well, I was contemplating working with Urdu sources, so I started reading Urdu texts from the late 19th, early 20th century. What used to intrigue me is why I found the writings of the late 19th and early 20th century Muslim writers to be far more expansive than what we find today. The winning of independence seems to have led to a closing of the mind steadily, whereas subjugation did not make you insular, even though there are certain people who argue that Muslims were insular. But while I was reading this, certain works appeared in which it was stated categorically that Muslims are illiberal. They cannot be liberal because liberalism cannot accommodate, because of their religion, they can't be liberal. So that was one issue. And then on top of that, you have someone like Joseph Massad, who says that liberalism itself is a counterpoise to Islam.
Yeah.
That Islam is needed to act, that liberalism develops.
Yes.
You might not agree with him or agree with him, but nevertheless, if this is to be looked at, but what I found interesting in my study of Urdu authors, whether it was Shibli, whether it was Sayyid Ahmad himself, is that they use the term, so many English words have been taken into Urdu, but not liberalism.
That's right, yeah.
So the word used for what was clearly seen as an equivalent was Roshan Khayali, Azad Khayali, Damaghi Wusl, which are all from the Persian ecumen.
Yes.
So I think that I found very intriguing, and that's how the project evolved. And you are right that it took me much longer than usual because I had to read a lot.
Of course.
And then decide what to do with so much of this reading.
Yes.
And then I had to go back to them again and then reread them again.
Exactly.
And then, of course, then the idea of interpreting and translating some of it as well.
No, I'm so glad, because a lot of people in Pakistan and in India, of course, and wherever Urdu's read, or they've read these texts like Ghalib. We grew up with that Sayyid Ahmad Khan. But the way you read these authors, you sort of interrogate their texts and what these texts mean.
The other reason, of course, is that for the longest possible time, scholarship on so-called Muslim intellectual thought tends to categorize into classical, traditional, modern. And it's almost like these scholars prefer the categories than the content or what is being said. This could be because they don't know the language adequately enough, or the Urdu is too painful to go through. So I did want to take on the authors that I studied on their own terms, rather than use categories to label them.
Yes.
So labeling has been a way to avoid, first of all, my point about Roshan Khayali is that even somebody whom you classify as quote-unquote socially conservative could be a Roshan Khayali.
Yeah.
But the idea of traditional conservative, traditional secular conservative, so these categories have created more confusion.
Yeah.
There's more fluidity. there's more give and take than I think we realize.
Correct. There's a whole spectrum, and so let's talk a bit about this period where there's Mirza Ghalib after Mughal Empire declines, the British take over India formally.
I mean, Mirza Ghalib, as you know, I mean, he was so open to British rule. He's actually perhaps embarrassingly so open to it. It's famous that when Sayyid Ahmad wrote an introduction to Ain Akbari,
Yeah.
he said, "Why are you wasting your time on this old stuff?"
Yes.
Ultimately, Sayyid Ahmad withdrew that. Because Iqbal, Ghalib did write something for him, but he chose not to include it. But I think it's an indicative of what he thought.
Yes, and when he went to Calcutta, there was a journey, and he wrote in letters. He looked at the urban planning.
He was very fascinated.
Yes.
And the most interesting comment that he makes, of course, while he's on the boat is that there is a thing called jinn, or usme waqai jinn. It's totally fascinating.
It is fascinating, his whole engagement. But about even his thought, he is this Roshan Khayal poet,
Absolutely.
and one of the tragedies I feel in Pakistan has been that, Mirza Ghalib has not, of course, there's a very ambivalent attitude officially.
Why? Officially, but I think
officially.
for
people.
For people, he is by far
By far, he's the
favorite.
Yeah, he's the favorite, he's the best.
My favorite.
Yeah. No, but from a state perspective, because if Pakistan is state in post 1947, I often think of, when I read your work, I think of the present moment too, because they're intertwined in a way.
Yes.
And I'm like, why could we not have adopted some of these ideas? Why did we not,
I think it's our ruling elite found it easier to persist with colonial policies than bring about changes. As you know, take Punjab. Why was Punjabi not adopted, the mother tongue of this land? They continued the colonial policy of Urdu.
Yeah.
Of course, Urdu is essential, but I don't see why the children. Noam Chomsky has made it very plain, and as have other linguists, that teaching the child in their own mother tongue is essential.
Correct.
But when you start them with English, with Urdu, which is not what they speak at home, you create a cognitive dissonance for them.
That's right, exactly. So Ghalib, and then of course Sayyid Ahmad Khan, his pupil, his colleague, his contemporary, and Shibli Nomani you already mentioned.
Shibli was a more difficult person to. But there's no question that he's part of the Aligarh project.
Yeah.
For a while before he joins the Nadwatul Ulum. But people like Zakaullah, who I think has been marginalized.
Yes.
Dipti Nazir Ahmad, of course, his Miratul Urus is very popular. But I chose to work on something else.
Ibn al-Waqt,
which I think is a fascinating study of attitudes towards modernity.
Correct, exactly. And even Dipti Nazir Ahmad, who's a civil servant, who's acquainted with the Western ways, with the old colonial ways. Even I feel he's engaging with the colonial moment, but he's also trying to as I read in your book, is that he's trying to, in a way, respond and say that, we have a particular point of view as well. There's a subtle...
I don't know whether you remember that Dipti Nazir Ahmad's father was very conservative and didn't want his son to learn English. And so Dipti Nazir Ahmad learned English much later in life.
That's right.
So there is that he was basically educated by Maulvis, and he was married into a Maulvi family.
That's right.
And yet he chose to write books that not only engaged with, obviously he was influenced by the Victorian novel.
Correct.
But that he took ideas. His work is didactic. He is trying to reach. This is very much part of the Aligarh project.
Correct. It is very much part of that. But Sayyid Ahmad Khan's focus on education, on English language, because time and again he has said, Angrezi padhiye, seekhiye, whatever. So all these figures, by the time we are entering the 20th century, are shaping some of the ideas, and this marginalized, battered community, post-global.
Take the Mussadas-e-Hali.
Yes.
The Mussadas-e-Hali is not an apologetic
No.
work. It's a critical work of Muslims, of how Muslims have degenerated. The entire work is sort of criticizing the Musliman, but also giving some hope, by drawing upon the past.
Right.
So I think that those projects need to be taken seriously. What was he trying to do? He was trying to get Muslims to keep up with the times, the new knowledge systems, because he said that, it's your tassub, it's your bigotry that prevents your prejudice.
Right.
You're not taking on this. It's only about taking back what we gave them.
Right.
So we've gone into darkness, but now Europe is on the rise. But let's take this. Knowledge is not sort of racialized. Knowledge is cumulative.
Cumulative, exactly. And then we get into this part of early 20th century where then poets and thinkers like Iqbal are also, Iqbal's corpus, as you said it at a talk recently, that it's a lifetime project to study.
Yes,
Iqbal.
I don't even think a lifetime is enough to truly understand every aspect of Iqbal. After reading his reconstruction lectures, which I have used in earlier works, the one theme that always fascinated me was his concept of time. And so since in this book I begin with the transcreation of religion after 1857, and then look at what Muslims did with the past or with the writing of history, partly to contest colonial accounts, and also to encourage the younger generation. It was interesting how they were dealing with the writing of history. There I could bring in time, because time is very important in history. Iqbal's concept of time is the main thrust of mine.
It's non-linear.
Non-linear.
Yeah.
He says that that's there. Mechanical serial time is there, but he says that you need the concept of time he talks about is pure duration, for which he says you need an effective self as opposed to an efficient self, which is for the mechanical serial time.
Yes.
So don't get lost in serial time. Try to
yeah.
understand things.
And also this concept of continuous change.
That's right.
That
the world is constantly changing, the universe is constantly changing, and so to say that things are static, that is, and sadly under colonial influence, our intelligentsia, a good portion of them believe that, there are the very conservative ones who think that the best in Islam, if you want to be really Muslim, you need to go back to the 7th century. Not move forward.
Correct.
So I think Iqbal is giving a very different concept, that you can have pure duration and yet move forward and be part of constant creation.
Constant creation. And then Iqbal obviously represents this particular moment. I think, of course, beyond poetry and philosophical musings, the whole, you mentioned the lectures, even in terms of reinterpreting some of the jurisprudence that we are stuck with.
He's quite critical of the jurisprudence.
Yes,
because he feels that has been the cause of the stagnation that has taken place.
Right.
So I think in that sense, Iqbal is the Roshan Khayal par excellence.
Par excellence, exactly. And then you obviously, the third part of your book looks at Iqbal's in a way, pupil, Sadiq, the great painter. The best that we've had,
he's a controversial figure. I don't think everybody agrees that he's the best. I think we find his choice of themes problematic. When he has cactus growing out of heads, he's making a point.
He's making a point,
but people don't like it. People like to see pretty things. I'm not there to paint pretty things.
Exactly. And this range. The murals, the subjects, the poetics of his...
And plus, he was a very literary character. He wrote poetry that you may not think is the best, but clearly it informed his paintings.
It did. And
he was a great calligraphist.
Yes, and his engagement with the West.
And the problem with Sadiq Khan's reception in this country is that the so-called liberals of this country find him problematic because he was seen as doing calligraphy, but what people don't realize is that he was doing calligraphy long before Ziaul Haq appeared on the scene.
Yes, exactly.
So that's really crucial.
That's exactly, and I think we have to discard the word liberal because I'm going to adopt Roshan Khayal. So,
but liberalism is quite a problematic concept, very problematic.
And I want to go back there because you see the introduction, the first part of your book, and throughout there's a theme where you say that the so-called West and the
These are constructs.
constructs.
I mean, so as I was pointing out in our conversation the other day, we talk about Christianity. Is it a Western religion or is it an Eastern religion?
Yes, that's right.
So, I mean, and to say that Muslims, I mean, are there no Muslims in the so-called West? So I do think that these are constructs aimed to perpetuate certain points of views, whereas, and they ignore the cross-fertilization that is part of human history of knowledge.
Right, exactly. And I think that is where your work, I suppose, brings an antidote, because often in Pakistan also, and to some extent in India, whenever people are thinking, we think in terms of the colonial frameworks, even now.
But even now, take South Asian historiography. It's commonplace for very good scholars to first engage with the West, with Western thought. They don't have. And part of that is because they have no choice, because that's the language they're familiar with. And the cutting off the bonds with the Persianate world is problematic. That's why I believe and say all the time that modern historians like myself need to engage with early modern historians, because who have an expertise in Persian or Arabic. Because those were the things that did influence individuals like Zakaullah or even Nazir Ahmad. These were all people who knew Persian and Arabic.
Yes.
So, we have been deprived of them.
Yes,
completely.
Exactly. Now yours is an intellectual history or a magisterial review of this era and of these people. But of course, I'm going a little beyond that. So, Dr. Jalal, what happened then after 1947? I think you address it partially, because you've done it in your other works. So what happens, because there's this whole tradition of thinking, of engaging with ideas, of opening, reinterpreting some narrow jurisprudential ideas.
I think it's the creeping authoritarianism that takes place in the post-colonial period, where there's a desire to not just control the instruments of coercion, to use a Weberian idea, but also control the frontiers of intellectual thought. So you're trying to control the mind. The nation state tries to, or rather the elite who are dominant in the nation state try to control the way people are thinking. So I do think that is what led to a steady closing of the mind, and then with outright military authoritarianism, of course, there were curbs on thought. But what I find remarkable is that despite those curbs, we still have some rather spectacular examples of Roshan Khayali. Take Faiz Ahmed Faiz, take Sibte Hassan.
Right.
So there's always been, and even today, you see so many people still presenting a point of view, but they're not mainstream because the state has shifted. The state prefers to promote a particular very sort of obscurantist or conservative view of what religion is and what its place is in society.
And what happened in India? There's a big, as you know, it's the biggest minority, perhaps the biggest minority in the world, if you look at the Muslim minority. So,
there are again people in India. I think it's important to remind the listeners that Islam is an interpretive religion. Muslims it's an interpretive community. So you have people in India too who are more open-minded, expansive. And then there are those who are more insular. If you take the Shahi Imam and compare them to a myriad others who have written. So of course, this struggle has always continued. But in India, where the difference is that unlike Pakistan, where the state has chosen, certainly after Zia, a particular version of Islam, the state hasn't done that in India. Which leaves more space. Potentially, for Indian Muslims to engage with ideas that are more open-minded.
But yes, it creates more space, but on the other hand, the stereotyping of Indian Muslims, because if you look in the mainstream, they are fossilized, they are uneducated, they are poor, they're stuck in their old ways, 14th century. That's a common refrain. But what I'm really intrigued, and I think that's a subject that I want to really investigate, is that what potential the power of these ideas lies, because it's very much part of our lived tradition. You know, we recite Ghalib in every day. We look at fairs. So how powerful are these influences for our present and for our future? Because I mean, you know, if we want to reimagine Pakistan, for that matter, India as well, there's a whole you know, necessity to go back to our own traditions.
I think there's a real need for critical thinking, and I think that's what has been curbed through successive bouts with authoritarianism. There's been an attempt to create an ideology,
Right.
without any roots in history, which sort of you know, supports the state's narratives. So that has been the real problem, and the fact that your educational system promotes rote learning as opposed to a creative thinking. You know, we are producing a generation after generation that can't think out of the box.
Right.
And those who do get sidelined.
Sidelines, or they leave.
Or they have to leave because there's no place for them.
Yeah.
That's the sad part.
That's the sad part. So education system again and again emerges as that. And finally, at the end, I would like you to maybe suggest from your book one or two texts that our viewers, especially the younger ones, who should which author or poet or
I mean, if you're not comfortable with Urdu, because one of the problems with our generation, younger generation, is that, you know, I mean, I heard this all the time at Lums where I taught in the previous years. Madam, we don't read Urdu. So, what do you read? I mean, so, you know, I find that remarkable. So for those who are English medium, they should read the likes of Sayyid Amir Ali's The Spirit of Islam. I mean, you know, it's quite a remarkable piece of work.
Yes.
Then I would say that, I mean, those who have more of a literary bent, I strongly encourage them to read literature from the late 19th, early 20th century. People like Nazir Ahmad, who is didactic, but Abdul Halim Sharar is quite fantastic in some of his, I mean, he wrote historical novels. But he also wrote other novels, which I think are quite interesting. And he did very well. And he also ran a newspaper, I mean, a journal. So I think we need to, for those who can read Urdu, should read people in the original.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Jalal.